The fact of the matter is, most organizations are pumping out way too much volume of content and more than our buyers or audiences need to or want to consume. So we're all very busy churning out content, moving well beyond what was truly valuable.
Welcome to the Digital Advantage by Bynder, a show by marketers for marketers who want to create engaging content experiences to differentiate their brand from the competition. In each episode, a member of the Bynder team will host a conversation with a leading marketing expert to discuss trends, challenges, solutions, and how to remain competitive in an uncertain economic landscape. Our guests will share stories that showcase innovative ways of using content to inspire marketing leaders to take action, optimize their content strategies, and ultimately achieve the success they seek. Let's jump right in.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Digital Advantage. My name is Dónal Ó Mearáin. I'm Director of Lifecycle Marketing at Bynder. And in this show, we are trying to help marketers who want to create standout content to differentiate their company from the competition. And to help us do that today, we've got a guest who's an experienced Silicon Valley B2B marketer, worked across multiple industries, multiple marketing disciplines, large and small tech companies. And with the breadth of experience she's going to bring, we're going to explore the future of B2B content and why and how marketing leaders are investing in content in 2023. So welcome to our guest, VP Principal Analyst at Forrester, Phyllis Davidson. Phyllis, thanks for joining me today.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dónal. It's great to be here.
Brilliant. Yeah, lovely to have you. So we're going to talk about AI, experimentation, and ultimately dive into why and how marketers are investing in content in 2023. But before we do, something I've admired of yours from afar is all of your wonderfully titled blogs and research papers. So thank you for being so committed to bringing a bit of fun to the B2B marketing space.
Oh, well, thank you for thanking me for that. Sometimes I get some eye rolls, but I do like to have fun with little taglines and titles. In fact, one that you might be interested in that's coming up in a piece of research I'm doing on a landscape of content engagement solutions, where I was thinking about AI and disruption. And of course, everybody's talking about ChatGPT, but my feeling is that there's a lot more to the AI story when it comes to content than ChatGPT. That's kind of the latest shiny object, and no question, it's going to have a profound impact. But I think of this in terms of disruption as generative AI and AI in general. It's really being what's disrupting the whole content lifecycle, particularly in B2B organizations where we've got more complex stories to tell and have to put a lot more energy into creating content. There's so many ways through the whole content lifecycle that AI can help.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's dive into that, right? Like, what role is AI going to play in the content lifecycle in future?
Well, what the places where AI already exists is certainly in managing the life cycle of content from the standpoint of things like automated tagging, SEO. And when I say automated tagging, basically also being able to enhance an organization's taxonomy by basically monitoring everything and seeing what's coming out on top at any given time can actually create new tags. Addition to that, just speeding things along in the workflow. Certainly, AI plays a big role when it comes to orchestration of content experiences and the ability to personalize experiences. AI is basically the key factor behind the scenes. So it already exists. And we do find that many clients don't even realize that that's really what's playing in the background when they work to improve the customization that they put into content, or really just work to get content out quickly and efficiently. So I think that there's a big opportunity for organizations to take better advantage of the AI they already have while they step in and begin to experiment with ChatGPT and its competitors. And there's some important key points there, because one of the things that we're observing already that people are thinking about, and it's wise to think about, is we can't just turn over our content creation to an automated engine, first of all, without a lot of oversight, just simply for accuracy, governance reasons. Certainly there's that. But there's another point, which is if your competitors are all using the same engine, I mean, how is your content going to be differentiated? It's going to be critical that we figure out how to train AI engines on our differentiated thinking and ideas. I think there's going to be an opportunity in the industry for companies to come forward with AI trainers, if you will, embedded in software to really make the most of training AI on a particular company's value, right? And that's going to be
Sure.
key. Otherwise, we've just got this sea of sameness that we're going to be dealing with. And the other point there, of course, is the oversight point. So we do hear from people saying, hey, do I need to fear for my job with this? And I would say absolutely not. You may need to learn some enhanced editorial skills. But what we think is going to happen is generative AI will help scale content volume, hopefully with quality, right? We only want to increase volume with quality if we're increasing volume. And hopefully that will enable folks to focus on other things like training the engine, like thinking of content in a modular way so that derivatives can be created off of primary content and that content can be altered for different industries, for different accounts, and so on. So there's plenty to be done that's not getting attended to today because people are busy just churning out content.
Absolutely. The thing about the generative AI piece that happened in the last, 5-6 months, right, is it created this incredibly visceral response. You mentioned about like job replacement. That is something that people jump to and we're very, very, worried about, rightfully so, in sense of that is a scary sentence, but not rightly so necessarily in where the technology is, in my opinion. And you probably need to separate the signal from the noise here a little bit. So, and you touched on it there, is even if generative AI does become the norm for every company, democratizing and accelerating that content creation, like your brands are still going to be brands. You're still going to have guidelines. Content will still need to be managed and stored and distributed. Will still need to be assessed the performance of it. And all of that is going to require a human touch. And what you'd hope is happening is exactly like you mentioned there. And that's one of the things we do. AI tagging is something that we do have. As you're uploading content, smart tagging is based on visual characteristics to eliminate the manual work. That is exactly what we should be using some, AI elements for. And often, you're dead right as well, that stuff does exist. It exists in our platform. It has for a while.
Right.
And we are, but we are retraining our own customers on this because it just hasn't been, I think AI had so much promise for so long. Some part of it was realized with generative AI that it lifted sort of the scales from people's eyes, or, maybe a malaise had set in, and now it's all very real and all very sudden. Yeah. So I think my opinion would always be around this, that it should be another tool that is used to improve your content operations, to remove operational inefficiencies and allow your teams to do the kind of work that, is going to improve performance as opposed to maybe manual effort as well.
And, there's no question that it introduces a lot of risk, right? And turning over live content to generative AI is certainly not recommended at this point. It will need that oversight. It's also the case that we have to really consider what's the right kind of content to basically put our generative AI engines on. And, you would argue that it seems unlikely that you would want AI to write a key piece of thought leadership. That said, what I am finding in talking to clients and I have a colleague who's a fractional CMO now. She's had all sorts of great jobs as CMO in Silicon Valley. And she's doing fractional CMO. She's doing a lot of marketing planning for companies. And she's been using generative AI to basically do her first draft of content plans. And that's an interesting use case. When she first told me that, I was a little bit surprised. And then I realized, if it's a matter of, especially, if you're someone that struggles with the first draft, and many writers do, getting that first draft done so that you can work off of it can be a great thing to do. I think what we're going to see is AI used for a lot of the always on kinds of content, blogging types of content, which of course may include thought leadership, but I'm thinking of shorter pieces that again will always need oversight. But, we'll sometimes recommend for folks, if you do have an always on content hub, you probably need new content sifting into that maybe 2 or 3 times a week. And if that's onerous for you, this could be a great way to get drafts generated and then reviewed. There's another thing too that's going to be really interesting to watch, which is what about measurement and understanding when we've gotten the right engagement? We actually get to a point where generative AI is creating net new content to personalize experiences for individuals that are engaged with us. That's really interesting. But at the end of the day, how will we measure what content worked and repeat it, right? It's not a no-brainer. I think this is something that's still to be figured out.
The idea that we're going to create, or there is this concept that we're going to create content and then have all the other skills to understand how it performed and etc. Like I do like, or again, I don't want to sound very much like this is definitely a massive change in the content generation game, right? But it's at the same time that there are all of these other skills are going to be left up by the wayside, right? In terms of your management of it, in terms of your distribution of it, in terms of your analysis of it and how it performs is sort of, I think like I say, it's just sort of, there's a signal and there's a noise here a little bit as well. That's my sort of take.
Right. And the thing is, I think the sort of schema for measurement as we move forward and we see more personalized experiences, whether that's done because the AI engine is assembling together modules that have been created by humans, or the AI engine is generating content based on the interchange, based on the exchange with individuals that are engaging with the content. The way that we measure what works and what doesn't is something that's not being done today. We're going to have to figure that out. I'm confident we will be able to figure it out. But, a while back, we had the notion that it could be that, let's call it 10 years from now, every individual has a completely different experience with content. And there's no longer such thing as an asset per se. There's an experience, which is a value exchange, basically, between the consumers of our content and the folks that we're trying to move through a buyer journey and, we as vendors. And every exchange is a little bit different. So, there's thousands of permutations of what we might have previously called an asset. So that's interesting, but it presents certainly a whole range of, we'll call it opportunities, challenges and opportunities in terms of measurement. Content measurement and content intelligence is a topic that we spend a lot of time on because we find that it's really the weakest point operationally for most B2B organizations. They don't really know what to measure. They find that they can't get at the data they'd like to get to.
Sure.
And then the data they have, they don't know how to really derive insights from it. So this is a big area of pain that frankly gets a bit more complex as new opportunities for segmenting your measurement are introduced through AI. So I do believe this is just an area we're going to be working on. But you can imagine, just logically speaking, that if you have, hundreds of versions of a so-called asset, how do you figure out what it was about one of those permutations that made a difference?
I think what we're sort of leaving that sort of, encapsulating that, I think one of the things I'm taking from it, maybe our, audience today can take from it as well, is how they think about content operations and, building it like a taxonomy or in order to utilize AI across the content lifecycle, right? Like that would seem to me to be like, think about this sort of thoughtfully, right? It'd be, it's sort of my takeaway there. But I think one of the things maybe like, how does experimentation play into that? I know you had one of your wonderfully titled pieces recently around B2B content experimentation means bold bets and cold sweats. So what's the importance of experimentation in trying to find out how things are working, what your audience are interested in?
Yes, thank you for bringing that up. So this is an area that I'm very passionate about and that frankly, I invite anyone who's listening to get in touch with me because I am looking for experimentation examples. Because I'll be honest, in my day-to-day relationships with customers, I don't naturally come across a lot of examples. What I find is that most organizations are so hard-pressed to just get content activated that they don't really have time to do any detailed experimentation. In fact, I've run across one client in the last month who has historically incorporated experimentation into the launch of every campaign, which I was mentioning to her that I think I'm going to be making her a program of the year because I don't see this enough. What we see is that people still have a sort of one-dimensional thinking when it comes to experimentation, which is we're going to change what's in the email. So we'll do A/B testing with different emails, maybe different landing pages. The asset's the same. What I believe is going to need to happen, especially as we take advantage of AI, is we have to parse apart the various aspects of content creation and activation and use of different channels and look at experimentation in each category of what we do with content. So that could also include testing variations on the content itself, which is probably the biggest area that we don't see people utilizing. The thing is, if we're going to get into generative AI and AI autonomously taking over that exchange, that volley between sellers and their buyers, and basically the AI engine is choosing the content, no one's going to do that until they test it. The question is, how do we test it? I mean, I think these are questions that are real time for us, right? We're not running across a whole bunch of companies that are deep into testing of generative AI yet. I mean, it's literally happening real time. So the question is going to be, what does it mean to test it? Are we going to test, let's see what the first draft comes out like? So that's certainly sort of behind the scenes. But when we think of experimentation, I think I would define that as experimentation with what gets delivered. The behind the scenes stuff, I mean, we're going to have to manage the orchestration, et cetera. But then we've got to test it. So I am going to be doing a lot of interviews with companies who I think are on the cutting edge of doing this kind of work. I will get to those companies through some of the platforms that seem to really push their customers to test different interactions, content, and method of delivery are kind of the three categories. I think generative AI adds a fourth, which is permutations of the content itself and testing out what happens when we give AI the opportunity to create something completely unique.
So, interesting question here for somebody which says, essentially, we're facing into an economy now that might be a little depressed, a little down. Okay, what role should experimentation play in that case? Like, should teams experiment more? Maybe keep doing what they're doing, play it safe, particularly when it comes to content. Any particular perspectives of what's happening in 2023 around that?
Yes. So let me give you a little bit of a precursor on 2023 as I move into answering that. And I've been thinking about this very question a lot because what I am finding is that all of our companies, particularly those of us in high tech today, are seeing a very challenged economy. Let's just be real, right? And we're going to have to figure out how to do more with less. I actually have a blog coming out tomorrow, and what more or less means for the content engine is the title. That title's in there anyway, because the fact of the matter is most organizations are pumping out way too much volume of content and more than our buyers, our audiences need to or want to consume. In fact, in that blog, I cite some really compelling stats about just how unhappy most buyers are with the content that they get from vendors. And probably the most compelling data point is that 69% of organizations indicate that if the content that they get from the vendors with whom they're already engaged, already implemented, if that content is really bad, they're unlikely to expand and continue contracts. That's a pretty daunting statistic. Almost
Right.
70% that tells us how important content is. But again, one of the problems is, and again, I think the number is like 61% of organizations say that anywhere from a quarter to 3/4 of their content goes to waste, meaning that it isn't used as intended. So we're all very busy churning out content, moving well beyond what was truly valuable. So this brings me to my answer to that question, which is yes, what we should be doing in 2023 is zeroing in on sort of the minimum viable product in terms of the right content and the right derivatives from a primary piece of content without going nuts creating huge volume. Instead, use that time and energy to incorporate some level of experimentation into every campaign. So when I say campaign, this means different things, at different companies. At Forrester, when we say campaign, we're talking about that multifaceted, multi-program, demand, awareness, ongoing customer engagement, the programs that have a body of content and a set of activation types that live for a period of 12 to 18 months. So I'm not talking about, you come out with an ebook and that's a campaign and you must do experimentation around that ebook. What I'm talking about is a body of content and figure out what you can experiment with, what it is you'd like to understand better. So the other thing that I tell organizations is that you ought to approach experimentation with a hypothesis. And that hypothesis should be based on whatever level of intelligence you have about the way your audiences are engaging with your content at the time. So what can you figure out from doing some experiments? Is it a matter of pushing one channel more than another? Certainly that type of experimentation can be done. Is it a matter of creating a derivative that changes out an introduction to the piece so that it's industry focused and trying that version on a subsegment of your audience that is attached to that industry versus the base level? Does it have to do with progressive profiling and the point at which individuals will actually receive, a two-field form? There's so many different aspects of the experience that we can experiment with. I think the trick is figuring out what would you measure if you could, what would make a difference to you in the way that you are executing on your program? What can you learn from experimentation? I will say that this is an area that I'm going to be working on heavily in the second half of the year. And my plan is to come out with some, first of all, based on what I can learn from what people are doing, to come out with some specific advice on ways to approach experimentation.
Fantastic. I mean, I think, for us and for our perspective, one of the things that it's like a muscle, right? Like experimentation. If you and your team practice it and you exercise it, you are conditioned to be able to deliver on further experiments. You're more likely to be at the cutting edge then of advantage, changes in the marketing landscape like generative AI, right? Whereas, taking time to, or not practicing that stuff has a deleterious effect. It impacts you badly over a long period of time because you are, focusing on maybe sort of the more day-to-day, the more mundane efforts as well. So yeah, it's just something that strikes me when you talk about it, right? It is a practice, it is a repeatable process, and there's a mentality and a mindset that allows your teams to, drive things forward. And I do think if I was to give some, just sort of a personal example of my experience having B2B and B2C background, I think maybe sometimes as B2B marketers, we can get lazy because we're not as blessed with the quantity of data that B2C marketers are, who can run sort of experiments in an afternoon. And we sort of, I've seen people say, oh, we'll have the results of this experiment in 3 months or something, which is not really the kind of thing we're looking for. So it's finding different ways to try and, experiment within that. And some of it can absolutely be content performance in a very sort of, engagement or conversion sense. And some of it can be a bit more listening for a signal, right? Listening for a response that it seems positive. And we've, implemented some things around that are really, we start to see, that are giving us insights into how, let's say, are the messages that are performing well on organic social as opposed to, in a new sense as well. So I'd love to talk to you a little bit about one of our big themes this year, right, is content experiences, how people understand your brand and engage with you, right? And we've spoken about AI and the creation of content, talking about experimentation within that content experience and finding out what works. Performance ultimately is the output of a great content experience, right? If you are delivering an experience on digital platforms and in physical, engagements with your prospects and best customers, you are going to, you ultimately, if you're providing something that's relevant to them, you are going to have the performance of that content is going to be realized. But I would like to ask you what your definition of like these contextual adventures and why they're so important.
So thanks for asking that. Contextualized content experiences are something that me and some of my colleagues have been talking about for a few years, but we're finding that the message is really sticking at this point. And frankly, it's advances in technology like you guys have, like so many of the vendors bring to the marketplace that are really pushing on this. So we think about personalization in a continuum. And there are 3 stages to personalization. Personalization itself, which we think of as what we've already been doing for a number of years. And that's kind of a base level, black and white, going from no personalization at all to very, very low level personalization, putting someone's name in the email, right? Then there's customization as the next level up. And we see that happening, let's say, in ABM scenarios. So you're able to, if someone lands on your website and their address is a known account in a particular industry, they get a different homepage, or they're taken to a different secondary page and to a set of assets appropriate for that account. Contextualization is the next step beyond this. And that's where what's happening is you have a system in place that basically you're activating all of your sensors. Okay, so any organization has sensors to send signals from folks who engage with them built into all the technology that's being used on the website, being used behind the scenes in other ways to be able to sense what folks that are interacting with you are doing and respond in kind. So it's what we think of as a sense and respond schema, if you will. A lot of companies don't really do anything with the sensors that are already embedded in their technology and in their interactions. And what we're teaching clients to do is to make the best use of those sensors to gather signals and then separate the wheat from the chaff, if you will, in looking at the right signals to change the experience. So at the end of the day, and again, AI is heavily incorporated in the background here, there should be this volley, this exchange between a seller and their buyer or customer audience, where every time a signal is sensed, a new experience is delivered. And if you are using AI, what that experience is changes over time as the engine learns what do people like this person, right? It's, we sometimes talk about with personalization being perhaps not so much about who you are, but who you're like, right?
Sure.
So the engine should be able to deliver experiences based on who you're like to the point until you become one of those individuals who's consuming and engaging with content that is actually training the engine as well, right? So becoming cognizant of that sense and response schema and leveraging the heck out of it is one of the things we talk to our clients about a lot. We tend to talk about this a lot within our demand and ABM service and content. So some of the work that we've done in this area, I've done with Jesse Johnson, who has some great research in our portal for folks who are clients on sensors and signals. So really important area.
Okay. One of the things I think we've been great at as marketers is building all of this customer data, right? And it was prioritized for a long period of time. And we actually spoke with Scott Brinker earlier this year, and his opinion is, it's an interesting chat, and it's on our website if anybody here would like to go back. But essentially the idea being like, we were fantastic at building out the customer data and collecting all of that, trying to deliver experiences, through all of these myriad touch points. In the end, exactly like you've sort of described there, he kind of said something similar. I was like, but we oftentimes end up with something like mail merge on steroids a little bit, you know what I mean? Like we have multiple different, I certainly see, and what we're seeing when people come to speak to us is they're rubbing up against those issues of the content to serve to build those experiences. And ultimately that's where it ends, it sort of ends up. And one of the things I think is interesting about contextual ventures is maybe we're learning a little bit of, in B2B space, we're learning this a little bit from B2C. We're bringing our own experience of what a good venture, like our content experience is. And we're being forced by increasing demands of B2C consumers, and younger generations coming online as B2B buyers, right? You've got, and so within that, if we think about sort of some of the relevance and the scale that's experienced in the B2C space, we did release the state of content recently. 66% of marketers say they're delivering content across 11 different channels, right? And we think about all the formats that are within that, and all of the, the even down to the product level, as well as, the brand level imagery that you could have. So you've got all these formats and channels and everything, the scale of that, and that's the experience that's being served to the B2C buyer. And we on the B2B side are finally, just in a lot of cases, just moving away from gating content. You know what I mean? Like, whereas previously it was like,
that's right.
Can't see behind the curtain. So I think that's one of the things I feel, when you, why contextual ventures, why content experiences are important. They're being driven by the buyer, the consumer, right? That's the expectation. The expectation has changed. That's sort of my key realization for myself over the last sort of year and a half or so.
Yeah, we will often say that we as business buyers are people too, right? We're all consumers, and we're all part of, I would say globally, that, the Netflix, I was going to say the Netflix generation, but my gosh, the Netflix generation spans, an incredible number of years. I remember my very elderly mother being, upset if Netflix wasn't letting her know what the newest, historical romance movie was, because she has an expectation that Netflix is going to, deliver the right information to her. And we all kind of feel that way. So that expectation is carried over to us. We expect the vendors who want to sell to us to go the extra mile to make the experience right for us. And of course, in many cases, it's not that easy, but something that we absolutely have to keep working on. And you mentioned, customer intelligence. We think about content intelligence as being akin to the customer data model, basically feeding the customer data model. So if you think about all of the things that you'd like to know in terms of data about your customer and your interactions, almost all of those interactions are seeded with content, right? Content is sort of at the heart of those interactions prior to folks becoming a customer, but then once they're a customer also. And that could be content that's exchanged directly with product organizations, with sales organizations, with legal and contracts. Content is at the heart of a lot of this, and understanding how customers engage with the content, and when content actually creates a bad experience, not a good experience. That kind of intelligence is critical to understanding the customer experience. So that's why in the future of content report that I think you've seen, we make kind of a bold statement that, content is data and creates the data that make up the customer data model.
There's so much going on here about the content engine. I think the content intelligence thing is something I'd love to dip into with you in a little more detail. I think there's elements of it that are, so somebody's asked here about, what are some of the early findings you've had from the content experiments. One of the things that we've done is we've been really focused on our organic social about the kind of content we're promoting, and sort of it is messaging rather than content, particularly on that channel. Oftentimes it is through text, and then oftentimes through video, etc. But we've started seeing people referencing that content when they're coming into us for the first time, and a lot more being consistent around that. That's an experiment we've been really consistent with in this year. And So people saying like, yeah, no, I heard about you on LinkedIn, which hadn't happened previously. And so that's early signs, early shoots, and we should continue doing that. And then that's the kind of stuff that resonates on that channel. So what was the bad content? The bad content is, stuff that talks about yourself and only yourself, right? Like, so we've sort of said, okay, well, that's not what people are there for. So there's a small example of something that we're trying to do. But then on sort of the grander side about the content intelligence, one of the things that we can now tell our customers API data from the content that is served in their DAM to the end touch points that it's served on. We know our own number for that is, I think in February the figure was 18 billion assets served to like 4,000 websites or such.
Wow.
Within that, each individual customer can see the individual content that they have that's being served to the end touch point. How, what is being used, what's not. So down to your point of like, what's used, what's not, good content, bad content. This is being created centrally and not being used. There's no more having to ask for that stuff. It's like, no, this was created for this purpose and it wasn't being used. There must be a reason for that at different levels or such. So I think that's sort of like, when we think about content intelligence, those two things, and if you can marry that sort of mass data part and the listening for a bit of a noise from your ideal customers, bringing those two together could be a way to sort of optimize your content engine, improve your content intelligence. That's something, sort of we found anyway.
Yeah, so I think there's an element of what we think of as process metrics that make up a comprehensive look at content performance. So we do find that most companies are still saying, well, I need to understand, I need to measure content value. So let me look at downloads, page views, the top asset with the most download, those tend to be the metrics they look at. And what we encourage is that folks look across what we think of as the metric spectrum in order to get a full view of content value. So that includes things like understanding how many of your internal stakeholders make use of that content and activate it on their own. That's why we tell people that at a operational level, you need to make sure that every group has its own kind of coding so that when you go back to look at how was a piece of content shared, you can see if it was shared by, field marketing in one country versus another, the digital marketing team versus field marketing, and so on. And sales is a really important constituent there. Where do you have the best results with content when sales shares it directly? But you want to make sure that sales doesn't download it from your website and send it as an attachment, because then you've just lost a really important piece of data about what resonates with your audience. So there's kind of a big picture of activity, output, and then actual traction with customers that influence the journey into pipeline and sales at the end of the day. So you really have to get that full picture to understand content performance.
So I think that's a great phrase that I've never heard before, the metric spectrum. So, there's a usage, there's some sort of, comprehension from your internal stakeholders and they're using it in the right way, right down to the end touch point conversion as well. Right?
We actually, and it's my colleagues in marketing operations defined this a number of years ago. And I thought it was so smart because I knew I had been a client at that point and knew inherently that this existed, but hadn't put labels on it. And they came out with a metric spectrum that starts with readiness to perform. And readiness includes things like having your content organized by a universal taxonomy so that everything is effectively tagged. If it's not tagged, you're not going to be able to get measurement out of your systems, right? So that's a readiness metric. Having enough content for each stage of the buyer journey for the key personas you're going after. That's a readiness metric. Then there's plain old activity. So actually having the plan to put the content out, what you're posting on your website, there's output from that activity. That really is where things like page views comes in. And then there's impact. And impact is where you're looking at what most people are trying to look at as the only metric now, which is actually how is content engagement connected to the progression of your qualified leads going through to the end of a closed won deal. I'm doing a session at our summit coming up called Looking Back to See Ahead, which, and this is something I work with clients on, is about doing a touch analysis, which most of us are familiar with, but at a higher level of granularity and focus on content. So looking at late stage pipeline and closed won deals and looking at what the individuals attached to those deals engaged with once you knew who they were, right? And so going back for most of us, we've got longer sales cycles. So there should be a period of time over which it's worthwhile to look at various systems where those individuals show up and understand what did they engage with when we actually sold, and then basically use that piece of data and compare it to other data sets, including does that jive with what we find out about anonymous engagement? So frankly, this kind of information is also the kind of information that would feed us in terms of experimentation. So if we understand what worked when we were successful, we should be looking at running experiments that kind of match up to what that experience is. If it worked that time, let's see what happens when we do, A or B with new content. So anyway, that's another angle on content performance management.
Well, and another example of one of your fabulously titled pieces as well. So I think the promise today that we wanted to let people walk away with is this idea of why and how marketing leaders, marketing teams should be investing their content. So maybe we could work around that question and sort of synopsize the multiple areas we've gone from, AI into experimentation, into contextual adventures and content intelligence, and sort of maybe, synopsize that in some way so that we have some sort of takeaways for our audience here today.
Well, you know what? I'm going to throw out something that I've just written into a piece of research that isn't going to be published for probably another month. And for that piece of research, I had to indicate sort of a main trend when it comes to B2B content. And I thought about that quite a bit. And what I chose, and I think we can talk about a little bit, is the notion that content is finally being recognized in B2B organizations as a strategic revenue engine, revenue process asset, right? We are seeing a lot more interest in what the heck is going on with our content from CMOs and chief revenue officers. It used to be a lot harder to get, executive leadership, even having a conversation about the content that we're using in all of our marketing. So this is, I think, an interesting area, an interesting realization that allows us to open up the conversation and pursue a conversation with executive management around the use of our content. So when we talk about content being the source, one of few ways we can actually measure customer satisfaction and customer experience is by looking at their interactions with content. So it is, I think, not all that bold to say, hey, content should be elevated to that level. Now, when you think about it, the fact that generative AI, has hit the entire industry. I heard someone say the other day, I've heard more than one person say this, that generative AI may be bigger than the internet. Have you heard that too? I mean,
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. This is a seismic event akin to that, if not, bigger. Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
So when you think about it, what does that say to all of us about the importance of content? It says so much.
Right.
So I think this notion of elevating the role of content is dead on, and we can all of us who are involved in our organization's content engines can take advantage of this moment to have those conversations, to get, I was going to say increase investment, but here's the thing, again, recognizing that we're entering a year where most organizations are going to have either the same or less budget. We're going to have to work smarter and use all of these tools to do more with less, if you will. The focus has to be on higher value, not higher volume. Absolutely. I think we can all successfully cut volume. I've said to a few clients that you could probably get away with one primary asset in a quarter from which you create multiple derivatives and new asset types. This idea that we have to be constantly churning out complex content is just silly.
Absolutely. I think our creative director and content strategists here at Bynder are applauding to that. That's definitely something that they've been,
That's great.
They've been driving, key hero pieces that exist for a long time that we are focusing on that quality message. It's good to know that's where you stand. I absolutely, love what you're saying there about, what does the conversation we're having about generative AI have to say about how important content is to what, we as people do, we as marketers do, right? Like that it is resonating this much is probably a sign of that. That's something I'm definitely going to walk away from this chat today with. So Phyllis, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you
for your
always
insights.
Great talking with you.
Yeah, I know. We'll hopefully have you back soon, to talk through some more about experimentation maybe, or certainly we'll hopefully bump into you at some events, whether that's CM World or Forrester's own events through the rest of the year. So yeah, absolutely. Personally, for me, this has been great for everybody attending. We'll be sharing the content afterwards. We're hosting these events regularly, so be sure to sign up to our own emails or socials to get notice of these. And yeah, thank you again, Phyllis Davidson.
Thank you.
Principal Analyst at Forrester.
Take care.
For joining us.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Digital Advantage, brought to you by Bynder, the leading digital asset management platform. Bynder helps you conquer the chaos of growing content, touchpoints, and relationships. If you found this episode inspiring, you'll love our additional content on our social channels, YouTube, or your favorite podcast platform.